Good evening, my little creatures of the night. Mr. Wendigo back again with your late night creature feature. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from tonight? Alone in your room? Driving through empty roads? Drop a comment and let me know. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now then, let's see what tonight's tale brings us. The last stop. Charles Dean had been awake for 22 hours, and the world had that fuzzy quality it got when your body started shutting down whether you wanted it to or not. Warehouse shift had run long, some mess with a shipment from Indianapolis that needed sorting before the morning crew came in, and then he'd gone straight to the bar. 4 hours of hauling kegs and mopping floors and pretending to smile at drunk finance bros who tipped like they'd never heard of inflation. Now it was 3:30 in the morning and he was standing on the platform at Clark and Lake, waiting for the blue line to take him home to the shoebox apartment in Logan Square that he could barely afford even with 2 jobs. 6 months in Chicago, fresh start. That's what he told himself when he'd packed everything he owned into a duffel bag and left Cleveland behind. New city, new life, new Charles. The old Charles had wasted 3 years in a relationship that ended with him coming home to an empty apartment and a post-it note on the refrigerator. 3 years of planning a future with someone who could summarize their goodbye in 8 words. Sorry. Can't do this anymore. Don't call me. The new Charles was going to be different, independent, successful. The new Charles was going to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else, that couldn't be taken away by a note on a refrigerator, that would prove everyone wrong about him. So far, the new Charles was just the old Charles, but more tired and with fewer friends. 6 months in the city and he hadn't made a single real connection. His co-workers at the warehouse were fine, nods in the morning, small talk at lunch. But they went home to families and lives and didn't need a 28-year-old refugee from a failed relationship tagging along. The bar was worse, just drunk strangers and the same conversations every night, the same forced smiles, the same tips that barely covered the gas to get there. His mother called once a week, always on Sundays, always with the same gentle disappointment in her voice when he said things were fine and couldn't elaborate. She'd ask about his job and he'd say it was fine. She'd ask about his apartment and he'd say it was fine. She'd ask if he'd met anyone and he'd say he was focusing on himself right now, which was code for I'm too exhausted and broken to try. His sister had stopped calling entirely after he'd missed her birthday last month. Not on purpose. He'd been working a double and had fallen asleep on the couch at 9 p.m., phone on silent, alarm never set. He'd woken up at 2 in the morning to 7 missed calls and a text that just said, wow. He'd tried to apologize, but the damage was done. Another relationship he'd let wither because keeping it alive took energy he didn't have. His ex had blocked him on everything, which was probably healthy but still felt like a door slamming shut every time he remembered it. Sometimes he'd catch himself reaching for his phone to text her something funny, some observation about the city or a memory that had surfaced, and then he'd remember. She was gone. She'd moved on within a week of leaving him, he'd heard through mutual friends, and he was still standing on train platforms at 3:30 in the morning, trying to figure out where his life had gone wrong. The platform was empty except for a homeless guy sleeping on a bench at the far end and a woman in scrubs who looked almost as dead on her feet as Charles felt. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that particular frequency that burrowed into your skull and made everything feel like a hospital waiting room. Somewhere in the tunnels, a train was coming. He could feel the vibration in the concrete, hear the distant rumble getting closer. Charles checked his phone. 3:32 a.m. The next train wasn't supposed to arrive until 3:45. CTA schedule said so, right there on the app. 13 more minutes of standing on this platform, trying not to fall asleep on his feet. But the rumble was getting louder, and now he could see lights in the tunnel, that familiar glow of an approaching train. The woman in scrubs looked up, frowning. She checked her own phone. then looked back at the tunnel. Her face was doing something complicated, confusion shifting to recognition, shifting to something that looked a lot like fear. The train pulled into the station. It looked like a normal Blue Line train, silver cars, blue trim, the CTA logo on the side, but something about it was off in a way Charles couldn't quite identify. The lights inside were dimmer than they should be, yellower, like the bulbs hadn't been changed since the 1970s. And the destination sign above the front car didn't say Forest Park or O'Hare or any of the usual endpoints. It just said, "Last Stop." The doors opened with that familiar three-tone chime. Charles glanced at the woman in scrubs. She was backing away from the platform edge, her face pale, her phone clutched to her chest like a shield. The homeless man at the end of the platform hadn't moved, still sleeping, or pretending to sleep, or maybe just smart enough to know what Charles didn't. "I'll wait for the next one," the woman said. Her voice was barely a whisper. She wasn't talking to Charles. She was talking to herself, reminding herself, "I'll wait for the next one." Charles should have listened, should have paid attention to the fear in her voice, the way she wouldn't look at the train, the wrongness that even his exhausted brain was trying to flag. The destination sign that didn't make sense, the lights that were the wrong color, the smell drifting out of the open doors, not the usual subway smell of metal and electricity and old urine, but something older, musty, like a room that hadn't been opened in decades. But he was so tired, 22 hours awake, and the doors were open, and there were seats right there. Empty seats in an empty car, and the thought of standing on this platform for another 13 minutes was physically painful. He stepped onto the train. The doors closed behind him, and the woman on the platform watched him go with something that looked a lot like grief. The first thing Charles noticed was the silence. All trains weren't quiet. They rattled and screeched and announced stations in that robotic CTA voice that every Chicagoan could imitate after a week in the city. But this train moved through the tunnel without making a sound, a smooth, gliding motion that felt wrong, like riding in a car with no engine, like floating through dark water. The second thing he noticed was that he wasn't alone. There were other passengers in the car. He thought it was empty when he got on, but now he could see them, shapes in the dim yellow light, sitting in the seats, standing near the doors. A dozen people, maybe more. None of them moving, none of them talking, just sitting there, staring straight ahead or out the dark windows at the tunnel walls sliding past. Charles found a seat near the middle of the car and sat down heavily. The cushion was harder than he expected, worn down by years, decades of use. He leaned his head back against the window and closed his eyes, just for a second. "You're new." Charles's eyes snapped open. A woman had appeared in the seat next to him. She was in her 40s, maybe, with dark hair shot through with gray and the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped being surprised by any of it. She was wearing scrubs too, not like the woman on the platform, but older scrubs, a style Charles vaguely remembered from medical shows in the 90s. A name tag on her chest read, Delilah. "What?" Charles managed. "I said you're new." The woman, Delilah, studied him with tired eyes. "You just got on. Clark and Lake, right?" I saw the doors close. "Yeah, I'm headed to Logan Square. The blue line goes to..." "The blue line!" Delilah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honey, this isn't the blue line. This isn't any line. This is the 333, and you're not going to Logan Square." She paused. "You're not going anywhere. Not anymore." Charles looked around the car, really looked this time. The other passengers were still motionless, still silent, but now he could see details he'd missed before. Their clothes were wrong, outdated styles from different decades, like a thrift store had thrown up all over the car. A man in a powder blue leisure suit from the 70s. A teenage girl in a grunge flannel. a businessman in the kind of wide lapel jacket that hadn't been fashionable since the 1980s, a young mother with a baby carrier wearing a poodle skirt that looked straight out of 1955, and none of them were breathing. No, that wasn't right. They were breathing. Charles could see their chests moving, slowly, mechanically, but they weren't doing anything else. No fidgeting, no checking phones, no reading or talking or doing any of the 1,000 small things that living people did to fill the time. They were just waiting. "What is this?" Charles's voice came out hoarse. "What's happening?" "The 3:33 train," Delilah said. "It runs every night, but not on any schedule the CTA knows about. It picks people up, people like us, people who are tired and alone and not paying attention, and it takes them." She gestured vaguely at the windows, at the darkness rushing past. "Somewhere else. That's insane." "Yeah, I thought so too, the first few days." Delilah pulled her knees up onto the seat, wrapping her arms around them. It made her look younger, more vulnerable. "I'm Dee, by the way. Delilah Santos. I've been on this train for about 3 weeks, near as I can figure. Time's weird here." "3 weeks?" Charles stood up suddenly, grabbing for the pole as the train swayed. No, I have to get off. I have work tomorrow. I have—" "Sit down." Dee's voice was sharp. "You can't get off. Not at the stations. Anyway, I've tried. Everyone's tried. The doors open, but when you step through them, you're still on the train. It's like, I don't know, like the platform isn't real. Like it's just a picture painted on the other side of the door." Charles didn't sit down. He walked to the nearest door, pressed his face against the glass, and watched as the train pulled into a station. The sign on the platform said, Kedvale. That wasn't a real station. Charles knew the blue line. He rode it every day. There was no Kedvale station. There never had been. The doors opened with that 3-tone chime. Charles could see the platform, could see the benches, the pillars, the stairs leading up to a street that shouldn't exist. It looked real. It looked solid. He could step through those doors and walk up those stairs and... Don't. Dee was behind him, her hand on his shoulder. "I know what you're thinking, but I've seen people try. They step through the doors and they're back in their seats like nothing happened. Or worse." Her voice dropped. "Sometimes they step through and they're not the same when they come back. Something happens to them on that platform. Something changes them." The doors closed. The train moved on. And Charles realized, with a cold certainty that settled into his bones, that he wasn't going home tonight. Dee walked him through the train, car by car, explaining the rules. First rule, don't look at the conductor. It comes through every few hours, or what feels like hours anyway, checking tickets. Just keep your head down, don't make eye contact, and wait for it to pass. Nobody knows what happens if you don't have a ticket, but Eddie tried to ask once, and she trailed off. Eddie's not really Eddie anymore. "Who's Eddie?" Dee pointed to a young man sitting alone in the corner of the third car. He was maybe 25, wearing jeans and a Cubs jersey that looked like it was from the 2016 World Series, and he was smiling. Just sitting there and smiling, staring at nothing, with an expression of perfect bliss that was somehow worse than the blank looks on the other passengers. He asked the conductor a question. Dee said quietly, 3 days after he got on. "I warned him. I warn everyone. But he didn't listen. He was a lawyer, I think. Or a law student. Smart guy. Thought he could figure out the rules, find a loophole." She shook her head. "Now he just smiles. All the time. Never stops. Never speaks. Just smiles like he's seen something beautiful that the rest of us can't see." Charles looked away. The smile was too wide, too fixed, like someone had carved it into Eddie's face and forgotten to give him permission to stop. Second rule, Dee continued, walking toward the next car. Don't try to get off at stations you recognize. I know that sounds backwards, but trust me. The fake stations, Kedvale, Thornwood, Millbrook, places that don't exist, those are just illusions. They can't hurt you. You step through the doors and you end up right back in your seat, no harm done. And the real stations? That's worse, because when the doors open at a real station, you can actually leave the train. You can step through and feel real concrete under your feet. Dee's voice was flat, practiced, like she'd given this speech before. But you don't end up on the platform. You end up somewhere else. Somewhere the train wants you to go, and nobody who's gone through those doors at a real station has ever come back. They pass through another car, more passengers, more silence, more of that wrong yellow light that made everything look sick and old. Charles noticed details now. The advertisements above the seats were for products that didn't exist, movies that had never been made, phone numbers with too many digits. A poster for a mayoral candidate from 1976, a warning about a disease called tunnel fever with symptoms he'd never heard of. An ad for a soft drink called Sunny Fizz that promised to cure exhaustion and sorrow. Third rule, Dee said. Don't go to the front car. That's where the conductor lives, I guess, stays. Whatever it does when it's not walking through the train checking tickets, people who go up there don't come back, or they come back like Eddie. What's in the front car? Nobody knows. Nobody who's looked has been able to tell us. Dee stopped walking. They were at the back of the train now, looking through the window at the tunnel disappearing behind them, darkness swallowing their past. That's where the engine should be, where the driver should sit. But I've looked through the window 100 times, and it's always just dark, like looking into a hole that goes down forever. And the fourth rule. Dee turned to face him, and there was something haunted in her eyes, something that spoke to 3 weeks of fear and sleeplessness and creeping desperation. Don't fall asleep, she said. Whatever you do, however tired you are, do not fall asleep on this train. Why? Because when you sleep, you dream, and on this train, your dreams aren't private. She tapped the window, the glass cold under her finger. The train sees them, it uses them. It finds out what you're afraid of, what you want, what you'd do anything to have again. It learns the shape of your memories, the color of your hopes, the smell of the places you miss the most. And then, it uses your dreams to make the stations, to make the illusions, to trap you. Dee's voice was barely above a whisper now. Kedvale was someone's street. I asked around, one of the older passengers, a guy named Harold, he remembers. Kedvale was the street he grew up on in Cicero. Thornwood was someone else's hometown. Millbrook was a summer camp some kid went to in 1986. Every fake station is a piece of someone's memory, twisted into a trap. And if you sleep, if you let it see inside your head, it'll make a station just for you. A place you want so badly you'll step through those doors without thinking. Charles thought about Cleveland, about his mother's house with the blue shutters, about the coffee shop where he'd met his ex, the park where they'd had their first kiss, about the apartment they'd shared for 3 years, the one he'd walked into 6 months ago to find empty and silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the post-it note. If the train made a station that looked like that coffee shop, that park, that apartment before everything went wrong, would he be able to resist? He wasn't sure. So what do we do? He asked. Just ride forever? Never sleep? Never get off? Just exist? Dee was quiet for a long moment. The train rocked gently beneath them, that smooth, silent motion that shouldn't be possible. There's a theory, she said finally. Some of the older passengers, the ones who've been here for years, they say the train has to end somewhere. That if you ride it long enough, stay awake long enough, you'll eventually reach the last stop, the real one, the place where this all leads. And then what? Nobody knows. Nobody's ever made it that far. Dee looked at him with something that might have been hope or might have been despair. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. But it's gotta be better than this, right? It's gotta be better than riding forever. Charles looked out the window at the darkness rushing past. He wasn't sure it did. Over the next few hours, or what felt like hours, Charles met the other passengers. There was Harold, a man in his 70s who'd gotten on the train in 1983. He'd been an accountant, he said. Had a wife named Margaret, 2 kids named Tommy and Sarah, a house in Naperville with a big backyard and a grill he used every summer. He'd worked late one night, really late, the kind of late where you miss dinner and bedtime stories and your wife goes to sleep without you, and he'd missed his usual train home. The next train had arrived at 3:33 a.m. I didn't even notice the sign, Harold said, his voice soft and distant, like he was talking about something that had happened to someone else. I was so tired. Just like you, probably. Just like everyone who ends up here. I saw the doors open and I got on and I sat down and I closed my eyes for just a second. He laughed, but it was hollow. Just a second. That's what I told myself. I'll just rest my eyes for a second. And then I woke up and the train was still moving and the station names didn't make sense and there was a woman in the seat next to me telling me the rules. Harold shook his head slowly, mechanically, like he'd made the same motion a million times over 42 years. Her name was Patricia. She'd been on the train since 1958. She taught me everything, the rules, the patterns, how to stay awake, how to stay sane. She was kind. What happened to her? Harold's eyes went distant. She got off at a real station, Washington, I think, 1991. She said she was tired of waiting. Said she'd rather take her chances with whatever was on the other side than spend another decade riding in circles. He was quiet for a moment. I never saw her again. Charles didn't know what to say. 42 years, Harold said, staring out the window with rheumy eyes that had seen too much darkness. 42 years on this train, and I still remember Margaret's face like I saw her yesterday, the way she smiled when I came home from work, the way she'd save me a plate of dinner, keep it warm in the oven, the way she'd fall asleep on the couch waiting for me, and I'd carry her to bed and she'd mumble something about loving me even when I worked too late. His voice cracked. They'd be older than me now, my kids, if they're still alive. Tommy would be 65, Sarah would be 62. Can you imagine? My little girl, 62 years old, a grandmother, probably, and I missed all of it. Every birthday, every graduation, every wedding, every single moment of their lives. He went quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I try not to think about it. It's easier if I don't think about it, if I just watch the stations go by and pretend none of it ever happened. Pretend I never had a life before this train. He looked at Charles with eyes that had cried themselves dry decades ago. You'll learn, eventually. You'll learn to stop thinking about before. There were the young ones, a group of 5 teenagers in flannels and band t-shirts and ripped jeans who'd gotten on together in 1995. Headed to a concert, Dee said. Nirvana tribute band at some club downtown. Nirvana had ended the year before, Kurt Cobain gone, but the music lived on and these kids had wanted to be part of it. They'd taken the wrong train and never made it to the show. They didn't talk anymore, hadn't talked in years, according to the older passengers. They just sat in the back of the 5th car, huddled together like a pack of wolves, watching everything with eyes that were too old for their young faces. When Charles tried to approach them, one of them, a girl with dyed purple hair and a Soundgarden t-shirt, looked at him and slowly shook her head. "Don't," she mouthed, "not worth it." "Don't bother," Dee said, pulling him away gently. "They're not really there anymore. Not mentally. They checked out a long time ago. It's how some people cope. By going catatonic? By not being present. By retreating so far into themselves that the train can't reach them anymore. Dee shrugged. It's not living, but it's not the worst option on this train. At least they're not suffering. At least they're not counting every minute like the rest of us. Charles met others, too. A woman in a 1950s house dress who hummed the same song endlessly under her breath. Something old, something that sounded like a lullaby. The same 16 notes over and over and over. A soldier in a uniform that looked like World War II, who stood at attention by the doors and never moved, never spoke, never acknowledged anyone's presence. A little boy in short pants and suspenders who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, who shouldn't have been out that late, shouldn't have been alone, shouldn't have been on this train for what Dee estimated was at least 70 years. The boy scared Charles the most, because his face was still young, still innocent, still waiting for a mother who would never come. 70 years of waiting, and he hadn't aged a day. None of them talked to Charles. None of them seemed to register his presence at all. They were passengers, but they weren't people anymore. Just shells, just echoes, just waiting for a stop that never came. How do you stay sane? Charles asked Dee. How do you not end up like them? I stay busy, she said. I walk the train. I talk to the new arrivals, when there are new arrivals. I keep track of the stations, try to map the route, look for patterns. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, dog-eared and filled with tiny handwriting. 3 weeks of observations. The train usually has 8 cars. The conductor comes through every 4 to 6 hours. The stations follow a rough pattern. 3 fake, 1 real. 3 fake, 1 real. If you can predict when a real station's coming, you can be ready. Ready to not get off? Ready to not get tricked. Dee flipped through the notebook. The real stations are the dangerous ones. Remember? They look exactly like they should. Right names, right layout, right everything. But if you step through... Gone. Yeah, I remember. Charles rubbed his eyes. God, he was tired. 22 hours awake before he got on this train, and now, how long had it been? 4 hours? 5? His body was screaming for sleep, his eyelids heavy as lead. How do you stay awake? Dee reached into her scrubs and pulled out a small bottle. Caffeine pills. The label was faded, the brand one he didn't recognize. I had these in my pocket when I got on, left over from a night shift that went too long. Been rationing them ever since. She shook the bottle. A few pills rattled inside. Not many. Maybe 3 days worth left. After that, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The conductor came at what felt like midnight, although there was no way to know for sure. Charles heard it before he saw it, a rhythmic clicking sound, like tap shoes on tile, moving through the cars behind them. Click, click, click. Regular as a metronome, steady as a heartbeat, getting closer with every second. Dee grabbed his arm and pulled him into a seat, forcing his head down until his chin almost touched his chest. Don't look, she hissed. Whatever you do, whatever happens, don't look at its face. The clicking got louder, closer. Charles could see it now in his peripheral vision. A figure in a navy blue uniform, the old-fashioned kind with brass buttons and a cap, and a ticket punch hanging from a chain at the waist. It was walking down the aisle with mechanical precision, stopping at each passenger, leaning in close like it was checking something. Checking tickets, Charles thought. Except none of them have tickets. We all just got on without paying, without thinking, without... The conductor stopped next to Harold, leaned in. Charles heard a sound, a wet, sucking sound, like something feeding, like a drain unclogging, like the last bit of milkshake being pulled through a straw. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, and then the conductor straightened up and moved on, Harold didn't react, just kept staring out the window, lost in memories of a family that had grown old without him. It was getting closer. Charles could feel it now, a coldness that radiated off the thing, a sense of wrongness so intense it made his teeth ache and his fillings hurt. The temperature in the car dropped 10 degrees, then 20. He could see his breath misting in front of his face. He kept his head down, staring at his shoes, trying not to breathe. The clicking stopped, right next to him. "Don't look, don't look, don't look. Ticket, please." The voice was wrong. It had too many layers, like multiple people speaking at once, slightly out of sync with each other. Men and women and children, old voices and young voices, voices that had been collected over decades and centuries and stitched together into something that almost sounded human but wasn't. Charles felt something touch his shoulder, cold, so cold it burned through his jacket and shirt, and it took every ounce of willpower he had not to look up. He could feel it there, looming over him, breathing something that wasn't air. He could smell it now, old paper and dust and something metallic, like blood or rust or the inside of an ancient machine. "He's with me," Dee's voice, calm and steady despite the tremor Charles could feel in her grip on his arm. "New transfer. Hasn't been processed yet." Silence. The cold pressure on Charles's shoulder intensified, fingers, or something like fingers, digging into his muscle, and he could hear something else now, a breathing that wasn't breathing. A sound like wind through dead leaves, like static on an old TV, like the whisper of 1,000 voices all saying the same thing too quietly to understand. "New transfer," the conductor repeated. The words came out fractured, broken up like a bad radio signal. "Will be processed in time. All passengers processed eventually." The clicking resumed. The coldness moved away. Charles didn't raise his head until he heard the door between cars open and close, until the clicking had faded into the distance, until Dee's grip on his arm finally relaxed. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Dee was pale, her hands shaking slightly. "That was close. It doesn't usually talk to us. It just checks. I don't know what it's checking for, but if it doesn't find what it's looking for, it moves on. What happens if it finds what it's looking for?" Dee just pointed at Eddie, still sitting in his corner, still smiling that terrible, endless smile. Charles decided he didn't want to know. He lost track of time. Hours passed, or maybe days. The train kept moving, stopping at stations that didn't exist, passing through tunnels that went on forever. Charles walked the cars to stay awake, talked to Dee about nothing and everything, tried to piece together the pattern she'd mentioned. 3 fake stations, 1 real, 3 fake, 1 real. The fake ones were obvious once you knew what to look for. Cadvale, Thornwood, Millbrook. Stations with names that sounded almost right but weren't. Platforms that were slightly blurry around the edges like a photograph that hadn't quite focused. People who stood too still and smiled too wide. Sometimes Charles would see things on those platforms that made his blood run cold. A woman who looked exactly like his mother, waving at him. A man who might have been his father, dead 5 years now, holding up a sign that said "Welcome home." Once, just once, he saw his ex-girlfriend standing by a bench, looking at him with tears in her eyes, mouthing words he couldn't hear. He didn't get off. He didn't even let himself walk toward the doors. But it was getting harder. The longer he stayed awake, the more the line between real and fake started to blur. He'd catch himself standing at the doors without remembering walking there. He'd find his hand reaching for the handle before his brain caught up. The train was learning him, testing him, probing for weaknesses. And he was so tired. The real stations were harder. "Chicago," Dee said when the train pulled into a station that looked exactly like the downtown hub Charles had passed through 1,000 times. The familiar tile work, Those geometric patterns in blue and white, the familiar signage, the CTA logo, the route maps, the advertisements for shows at the Goodman Theater, the familiar crowds of people rushing up the stairs, late for work, late for life, all of them alive in a way that the other passengers on this train had forgotten how to be. That's a real station, or at least, it used to be. The train pulls through there every few cycles. And if I got off, you wouldn't end up in Chicago. Dee shook her head. I saw a man try it once. He was new, like you. Didn't believe what I told him, thought I was crazy, thought this was all some kind of elaborate prank or hallucination. The doors opened, he stepped through, and she snapped her fingers. Gone, just gone. The doors closed and he wasn't in the car anymore, but he wasn't on the platform either. He was just nowhere, erased. Charles watched the doors close, watched the platform slide away into darkness, tried not to think about what would have happened if he'd tried to leave. What about the last stop? He asked. You said the train has to end somewhere. Dee was quiet for a moment. I've been riding for 3 weeks. Harold's been riding for 42 years, and in all that time, nobody's ever reached the last stop. The train just keeps going, station after station, forever. She paused. But there's another theory. Some of the older passengers, not Harold, he's too far gone, but some of the others, they say the last stop isn't a place you reach, it's a place you earn. What does that mean? It means the train is a test, or a punishment, or something in between. Dee pulled out her notebook, flipped to a page near the back. Look at this. Every passenger I've talked to, every story I've collected, we all have something in common. Charles looked at the page. Names, dates, brief descriptions. He recognized some of them. Harold, the young ones, the woman in the house dress. But there were others, dozens of others, going back decades. We were all alone, Dee said. Not just physically, emotionally. We were all running from something, or towards something, or just lost, stuck in between. Not really living, but not ready to die either. Nobody was waiting for us. Nobody would miss us when we were gone. Charles thought about his empty apartment in Logan Square, his 2 jobs that barely covered rent, his family back in Cleveland who he hadn't talked to in months, his ex-girlfriend who had moved on within a week of leaving him. The train collects us, Dee continued. The lonely ones, the forgotten ones, the ones who slipped through the cracks of the world. And it keeps us because, I don't know, because it's lonely too. Maybe, because it needs us for something, because we're fuel for whatever engine keeps this thing running through eternity. That's depressing as hell. Yeah, Dee laughed bitterly. Welcome to the 333. Charles made a decision. He couldn't just ride forever, couldn't just accept this, the endless stations, the broken passengers, the conductor checking tickets for an eternity. Dee had been here for 3 weeks and was already running out of hope. Harold had been here for 42 years and couldn't remember his own children's faces. The young ones had been here for 30 years and had forgotten how to speak. Charles wasn't going to end up like them. I'm going to the front car, he told Dee. She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Did you miss the part where everyone who goes up there doesn't come back? Or comes back wrong? Like Eddie? Everyone who's gone up there was already broken, Charles said. Harold was an accountant who missed his family. The young ones were teenagers who just wanted to go to a concert. Eddie. I don't know what Eddie's story is, but he asked the conductor a question. He didn't go to the front car looking for answers. He was trying to find a loophole, a technicality, a way to lawyer his way out. And you're different? Maybe, maybe not. Charles stood up, steadying himself against the sway of the train. But I'm not going to sit here and wait to become Harold. I'm not going to count fake stations for 40 years and forget everyone I ever loved. I'm not going to let the train turn me into another ghost." Dee stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the bottle of caffeine pills, pressed it into his hand. "You'll need these more than I will," she said. "If you find a way out, come back for the rest of us, okay? Don't just leave us here. Don't forget us like the world forgot us." Charles nodded. "I'll try. I promise." He walked forward, car by car, past the silent passengers and the flickering yellow lights and the advertisements for products that had never existed, past Eddie's endless smile and Harold's vacant stare and the young ones huddled in their eternal vigil, past the woman in the house dress, still humming her endless lullaby, past the soldier standing at attention, past the little boy who'd been waiting 70 years for a mother who would never come, past everything he'd learned to fear in the hours or days since he'd stepped onto this train. The door to the front car was different. It wasn't marked. There was no sign saying conductor only, or authorized personnel, or do not enter, but it felt different, heavier, like it was made of something denser than metal, something that absorbed light and sound and hope and left nothing behind but cold. Charles put his hand on the handle. It was cold, so cold it burned, so cold he could feel his skin trying to stick to the metal like a tongue on a frozen pole. He opened the door. The front car wasn't a car. It was a tunnel. A long, dark tunnel that stretched forward into blackness, lit only by occasional flickers of light that might have been stations passing outside or might have been something else entirely, something alive, something watching, something that had been waiting for him. The floor was the same grimy tile as the rest of the train, but the walls were different, organic, pulsing slightly, like the inside of something alive and breathing. Charles walked forward. The tunnel went on longer than it should have, longer than any train car, longer than the whole train combined. He walked for what felt like hours, his footsteps echoing in the darkness, the caffeine pills rattling in his pocket like a countdown timer. The walls pressed closer as he walked. He could hear sounds now, whispers from the darkness, voices he almost recognized. His mother calling him for dinner, his sister laughing at some joke he couldn't remember, his ex saying, "I love you," in that half-asleep voice she used in the mornings. The train was trying to stop him, trying to distract him, trying to make him turn around. He kept walking, and then he found the engine. Except it wasn't an engine, it wasn't anything mechanical at all. It was a room, a small, cramped room that looked like every break room in every workplace Charles had ever seen, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A coffee maker on a counter, half full with something that might have been coffee, a folding table with a few plastic chairs scattered around it, a clock on the wall that wasn't moving, its hands frozen at 3:33. And sitting at the table, sipping from a paper cup, was the conductor. It looked almost human here, in this light. A middle-aged man in a rumpled uniform, with tired eyes and a face that had seen too many late nights, too many empty platforms, too many passengers who got on and never got off. When it saw Charles, it smiled, not the too wide smile he'd feared, but something sadder, more knowing, more human. "You made it," the conductor said. Its voice was normal now, just one voice, just one person. Most people don't make it this far. Charles didn't know what to say. He'd expected a monster, a confrontation, not this tired bureaucrat in a break room that smelled like old coffee and regret. "What is this place?" he finally asked. "The end of the line," the conductor said. "Or the beginning. Depends on how you look at it." It gestured to an empty chair. "Sit. We should talk." Charles sat. "This train has been running for a long time," the conductor said. "Longer than your city, longer than your country, longer than a lot of things that think they're permanent. It's been called a lot of things over the years. The death train, The Midnight Express, the ferry, the last ride, different names, different cities, different forms. But it's always the same thing. It took a sip of its coffee, a conveyance, a transition, away from one place to another, from life to death, from one state to another. The conductor shrugged. Death is just a word. What this train does is more complicated than that. It collects people who are in between. People who aren't fully alive but aren't ready to be fully dead. People who got stuck somewhere in the middle. Charles thought about his life in Chicago, the empty apartment, the 2 jobs, the way he'd been going through the motions for months, years, without really feeling anything. The way he'd let his relationships wither and die because keeping it alive took energy he didn't have. The passengers, he said, they're not dead. They're not anything. They're waiting, like you were waiting, on that platform at 3:30 in the morning, too tired to care where you were going, too numb to notice that the train you got on wasn't the train you were supposed to take. The conductor leaned forward. You chose this, Charles. Not consciously, maybe, but you chose it. The train only stops for people who are ready for it to stop. Ready for what? Ready to decide. The conductor stood up, walked to the far wall of the break room. There was a door there that Charles hadn't noticed before, a simple wooden door, painted the same institutional gray as everything else. Behind this door is the last stop, the real one. I can let you through, if you want. What's there? I don't know. The conductor's voice was honest, tired. I've never been through. I'm just the conductor. I keep the train running. I check the tickets. I make sure everyone gets where they're going. It turned to face him. But I can tell you what's here, on this side. More of the same. More stations. More waiting. More passengers who'll ride forever because they're too scared to get off. Charles looked at the door. Or I could go back, he said. Back to the other cars. Back to Dee and Harold and the rest of them. You could. The door's not locked. The conductor sat back down, picked up its coffee cup. Most people who make it this far go back. They think about it. They stand in front of that door, and then they decide that forever on the train is better than whatever's on the other side. Fear of the unknown. It's a powerful thing. Charles thought about Dee, about the hope in her eyes when she'd given him her caffeine pills, about Harold, who'd spent 42 years waiting for someone to show him the way, about the young ones and the woman in the house dress and the little boy who'd been waiting 70 years for his mother. If I go through, he said, can I come back for the others? The conductor was quiet for a moment. That's not usually how it works. But is it possible? Another pause. It's possible, if you earn it, if you remember why you came here, if you hold on to that purpose tight enough that the other side can't take it from you. Charles stood up, walked to the door, put his hand on the handle. It wasn't cold this time. It was warm, like sunlight, like coming home, like everything he'd been missing for the last 6 months of his empty, exhausted life. What's your name? Charles asked. Your real name? The conductor smiled. I don't remember anymore. It's been a long time. I think I was a passenger once, like you. I think I made a choice, but that was a long time ago. Charles opened the door. Light poured through, warm, golden, real. He couldn't see what was on the other side, but he could feel it. Rest, peace, an ending that was also a beginning. He stepped through. The train pulled into Clark and Lake at 3:33 a.m. Dee was standing by the door, watching the platform through the grimy window. She'd been waiting for hours, or days, or weeks, or however long it had been since Charles walked into the front car and didn't come back. She'd almost given up, almost accepted that he was gone like everyone else who'd gone forward, that she'd be riding this train until she forgot her own name, until she became another Harold or another Eddie or just another silent shape in a seat. The doors opened, and there he was, standing on the platform, looking at the train like he'd never seen it before, looking at her. "Charles." Dee pressed her face against the glass. "Charles." He smiled, raised one hand, made a gesture she didn't understand. "Come out. Come here. It's okay." "Come out," he mouthed. "It's okay. Trust me." Dee shook her head. "You know I can't. The stations, if I step through." "Come out." Charles stepped forward, right up to the doors, close enough that she could see his face clearly. His eyes were different, clearer, less afraid, less lost. Whatever he'd seen on the other side of that door, it had changed him, healed him. "Trust me, Dee, please." The doors started to close. Dee made a decision. She jumped. The platform was real, not like the fake stations with their blurry edges and their two still people in their slightly wrong proportions. Real concrete under her feet, solid and cold. Real fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, that familiar frequency. Real cold Chicago air rushing down the stairs from the street above, smelling like car exhaust and late-night food carts and life. Dee stood there, trembling, waiting for the world to dissolve, waiting to find herself back on the train like everyone else who'd tried to escape. Nothing happened. She looked at Charles. "How?" "The conductor let me through," Charles said, "to the last stop. And when I got there..." He paused, searching for words that could explain something that didn't fit into language. "It wasn't what I expected. It was just a choice. A chance to stop running. A chance to decide what came next instead of letting it happen to me." He looked at the train, still sitting at the platform with its doors open. I asked if I could come back for the others, and it said yes. Behind them, the train doors were still open, and standing in the doorway, staring out at the platform with disbelieving eyes, was Harold. "Go," Charles said to Dee. Tell them the last stop is real. Tell them they just have to choose." Dee started to argue, then stopped, turned, ran back toward the train. One by one, the passengers stepped out. Harold, tears streaming down his weathered face, 70-year-old tears for a family he'd missed for 42 years. The woman in the house dress, her humming finally silent, her eyes focusing on the real world for the first time in decades. The soldier, standing at attention for one final moment before his posture relaxed for the first time since World War II. Even the young ones emerged, blinking in the fluorescent light like they were seeing it for the first time in 30 years. The girl with purple hair, the one who'd shaken her head at Charles, looked at him and smiled. A real smile, not the hollow grins of the fake stations, not Eddie's terrible eternal expression. A real, human smile. "Thanks," she whispered. It was the first word she'd spoken in 3 decades. The only one who didn't leave was Eddie. He stayed in his seat, still smiling, lost forever to whatever the conductor had shown him when he'd asked his question. Charles made a note to come back for Eddie someday. Everyone deserved a choice, even the ones who seemed too far gone. The doors closed. The train pulled away, disappearing into the tunnel, off to collect more lost souls from platforms across the city. And Charles Dean, 28 years old, 6 months in Chicago, finally went home. Not to the empty apartment in Logan Square, not to the 2 jobs that barely covered rent and the life that barely felt like living. Home to Cleveland, to his mother's house with the blue shutters, to the conversations he should have had months ago, to his sister, who deserved an apology, to the life he'd been running from ever since that post-it note shattered everything he thought he knew. Home to start again. The sun was coming up by the time he made it to street level, Chicago in the early morning, gold light spilling between the buildings, the city waking up around him. Somewhere out there, people were getting ready for work, making coffee, kissing their partners goodbye, Normal life. The kind of life Charles had forgotten existed during his time on the train. He found a payphone, one of the last ones left in the city, and called his mother. She picked up on the second ring. "Hello? Mom, it's me. It's Charles." Silence. Then, "Charles, it's 5 in the morning. Is everything okay?" "Yeah." He leaned against the phone booth, watching the sun climb higher. "Yeah, everything's okay. I wanted to tell you I'm coming home. For real this time, not just for a visit." "Charles, what's going on? You sound strange." I know I sound strange, but I've been on a train for a long time, Mom, and I just got off, and I realized." He swallowed hard. "I realized I'd been running from everything instead of running towards something, and I'm tired of running." His mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with something that might have been tears. "I'll make up your room," she said. "Your sister will want to see you. And Charles?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you called. I'm glad you're coming home." Charles hung up the phone and stepped out into the morning light. Behind him, somewhere in the tunnels beneath the city, the 333 was still running, still collecting passengers, still waiting for the lonely and the lost and the ones who'd slipped through the cracks. But not him, not anymore. Charles Dean had found the last stop, and he'd chosen to get off. Every city has its ghost trains. In Chicago, they call it the 333, a blue line train that appears at random stations in the dead of night, running a route that isn't on any schedule the CTA has ever printed. The destination sign just says, "Last stop," and the passengers inside look like they've been riding forever. The transit authority doesn't acknowledge it. Officials have no record of any train running at that time on that route, no employees named to conduct it, no cars assigned to its phantom journey. But late shift workers and insomniacs know the truth. They've seen it pull into stations that should be closed. They've glimpsed the faces in the windows, blank, patient, waiting for something that never comes. The old-timers say you should never board a train you didn't call for, never get on a car that's too quiet, too empty, too welcoming. If the destination sign shows something you don't recognize, step back, wait for the next one, let the doors close without you. It's better to be late than to be lost. Because the 333 is always looking for passengers, and once you're aboard, you might just ride forever. Unless you're brave enough to find the last stop. Unless you're strong enough to choose. Some nights, if you're standing on the right platform at the right time, you might see faces you recognize in those windows. People who went missing. People who slipped through the cracks. People who got on a train one night and never got off. Most of them will look lost, empty, waiting. But every now and then, you'll see one who looks different, one who looks awake, one who's walking toward the front of the train, toward the car no one ever comes back from. Maybe they'll make it. Maybe they'll find the door. Maybe they'll choose. Well, well, boys and ghouls, that wraps up another terrorific tale from the vault. Oh, Charles actually made it out, got himself and the others off that Nightmare Express. You don't see that every day on Mr. Wendigo's channel, do you? Sometimes. Just sometimes. The good ones slip through. But don't get too comfortable, kiddies. That train's still running. Right now, somewhere in Chicago, it's pulling into a station at 3:33 in the morning. Doors opening. Waiting for the next tired soul who isn't paying attention. The next lonely heart who just wants to sit down for a minute. That's the thing about ghost trains. They never stop running. They just change passengers. Makes you think twice about that late-night commute, doesn't it? That empty platform. That train that shows up a little too early, a little too quiet. That destination sign showing something you don't quite recognize. Just how we love it. If this story made you check the schedule twice, hit that subscribe button. New creature features drop every single day at 8 p.m. Central, and tomorrow's tale goes somewhere even darker. Leave a like if you're never taking the late train again, and drop a comment. You ever been on public transit late at night and felt like something was off? Seen a passenger who didn't look quite right? I'm always hunting for the next nightmare. Remember, if a train pulls up that isn't on the schedule, if the destination sign says something you don't recognize, if the car is a little too empty and a little too welcoming, wait for the next one. It's better to be late than to ride forever. Until next time, kiddies, mind the gap and check your tickets. This has been your Late Night Creature Feature. I'm Mr. Wendigo, and the 333 is always running.